Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cabinet Conversations, or welcome back, I should say, to Cabinet Conversations. My name is Erica Scott, and I'm the Artistic Programming Manager at Ford's Theater. If you are joining us for the first time, this is our live series exploring creativity, history, and leadership. You can learn more and explore our past programs by visiting our website at www.fords.org. Today, we have a special co sponsored cabinet conversation with Mosaic Theater to discuss something that is prevalent in the media right now and prevalent as ever in our history. 67 years ago, a young boy from Chicago took a trip to Mississippi to visit his family that took a horrifying turn. 67 years later, Emmett Till's story is embedded in the fabric of our nation's civil rights story. This past March, the United States Senate passed a bill, Emmett Till Antilynching Act, making lynching a federal hate crime. With the passing of the bill and the release of the new films and docuseries and plays, Emmett's story is rising again to the surface of our national consciousness, bringing us to a crossroads of active history and storytelling. Today, we welcome Aoife Beza, Dr. Hilary and Green, and Luis Lopez to Cabinet Conversations. Welcome to you all. Aoife is an award-winning playwright, director, novelist, and educator. Her literary style and transcendent themes veer from the intimate to the mythic and compel us to re-examine the deeply embedded ideas we attach to race and gender. A 2022 McDowell Fellow, Aoife was a finalist for the 2020 Herb Alpert Award in theater and for the 2020 Francesca Primus Prize. And in 2018, she was the inaugural humanist in residence at the National Endowment for the Humanities. Honors for the Ballad of Emmett Till include the Edgar Award, the Backstage Garland Award, and fellowships from the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center and Brown University. The Till Trilogy will make its world debut at Mosaic Theater Company in Washington, D.C. It's running now, y'all, so go see it. It's running until November. Dr. Hilary Green is the James B. Duke Professor of Africana Studies at Davidson College. Her research and teaching interests include the intersections of race, class, and gender in African American history and the American Civil War, Reconstruction, Civil War memory, the U.S. South, 19th century America, and the Black Atlantic. She is currently at work on several projects, including a second book examining how everyday African Americans remembered and commemorated the Civil War. She is also at work on several pieces exploring the enslaved experience of the University of Alabama and other topics on African American experience during the long Reconstruction era, including the burden of the University of Alabama's hallowed grounds. Her book is I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, is The Public Historian 42, and it was released in November 2020. So go check her out. And finally, Luis Lopez is a federal civil rights attorney who currently serves as the chief of the Policy and Strategy section in the Civil Rights Division at the U.S. Department of Justice. In this position, he oversees the development and execution of legislative, regulatory, and policy proposals, as well as strategic initiatives that support the enforcement of civil rights laws in areas as education, employment, housing, voting, and criminal justice matters. Mr. Lopez also worked in private practice at law firms in both Washington, D.C. and Chicago, as well as at the Washington Post Digital. For 8 years, Mr. Lopez served as an adjunct professor at Georgetown University Law Center, where he taught advanced courses on labor and employment law. He received a JD from Harvard Law School and an LLM in labor and employment law from Georgetown University Law Center. Again, welcome all three of you. We are so thrilled to have you all here on Cabinet Conversations today. As a reminder to our viewers, we are taking questions on our social media platforms, and we are broadcasting on both YouTube and Facebook for both Ford's Theater and Mosaic Theater. So, whichever one you all are watching, welcome. Uh, please feel free to submit your questions and share them. And as we are able to, we will funnel them into questions with our guests. All right. Now, but nitty gritty. One of the most amazing and important things that we're eager to illuminate in our conversation today is how, for every moment in history, there's the facts of what happened, there's the historical memory of what happened, and then, or how we understand the story in our lives and in our community. And then there's the greater storytelling overall of what happened and how that becomes part of the national narrative. All of you, this first question is for all three. Our audience is joining us from all over the country today, hopefully all over the world today. So let's begin with the facts. Who was Emmett Till? Lewis, do you want to start with that question?
Sure. So as a current government employee, I need to give a caveat. Sorry about this.
Absolutely.
Well, I work in the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, which helps to enforce the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act. The views I'm expressing today are my own and not that of the Department of Justice or the federal government more generally. The tragic story of Emmett Till resonates with me personally for a couple different reasons. First, it's a profound statement about the historical and continued stratification in parts of our society and its harmful effects on our daily lives. Whether these hierarchical systems are rooted in public laws or social norms, they seem to reflect a consistent desire to elevate certain groups over others. And while this approach has affected a broad range of people over time, of course, it always tends to subjugate those who are most vulnerable and powerless. My own family experienced some of this history. I'm originally from Mexico. My grandfather emigrated to the United States to find work as a tailor and a musician to support his family. During the 1950s, he spent some time living and working in Chicago, remarkably around the same time and in the same city as Emmett Till. When I was young, my grandfather would tell me stories about different parts of his life. In one story, he told me about going to the movies when he lived in Chicago. He loved film and music, art forms that often move people and tell interesting stories. And I think I inherited that trait from him. When he would go to the movies, where he sat in the theater depended on what he said. He was lighter skinned, and if he just raised his hand with the single finger extended, they'd give him a ticket in the white section. If he had to speak, though, his pronounced accent resulted in him being seated in, quote, the colored section. I tell you this because these exclusionary tactics used at the time of Emmett Till's life are more universal in terms of not only who they affected, but also what the potential consequences of noncompliance could be. In my grandfather's case, his words, perhaps coupled with his color, resulted in being seated in a less desired area of the theater. But for Emmett Till, his words, coupled with his race and color, led to his horrific abduction, torture, and death. Learning about prejudice, inequities, and discrimination in cases like this led me down an intentional course to pursue a career in civil rights, to work for people who are marginalized, hurt, and may find it difficult or impossible to speak for themselves. I think that the second way and more fundamental way I think of Emmett Till's story is one about common humanity, both the tragic loss of innocence and the hopeful discovery of strength that one doesn't even realize that they had. The hatred and violence that led to the light in life being untimely snuffed out of this smart and funny 14-year-old boy is beyond horrific and breaks my heart. And acts of hate like this reverberate through families, communities, and the nation, just like they did with Emmett Till's murder. From hate crimes like this in 1955 to others that continue today, we see people's growing fear that they too may be threatened, attacked, or forced from their homes because of what they look like, who they are, where they worship, or whom they love. But I also like to focus on Emmett Till's brave mother, Mamie, and the strength it took to do what she did in the face of such tragic circumstances. Mrs. Till's difficult and courageous decision to have an open casket funeral and to speak openly, honestly, and often about what happened to her son became a touchstone that helped to ignite the civil rights movement. The difference that one human can make is as powerful as it is personal. And so when I reflect on Emmett Till's story, I also try to think about what I can do, how I can be brave, and where I can contribute in helping make a more positive difference in this world.
I would like to follow on that because I think for me, I learned about Emmett Till's story as a young child watching Eyes on the Prize, which still is one of the best documentary series that is done on the civil rights movement. And the introduction to hit this 14-year-old murder, but also to how white women's lives led to his murder and continue to find no justice, but also a Black mother's love in not only refusing to remain silent, because the system of race that led to Till's murder also created a system of silence and terror. And it needed people to be brave, to be bold, to step away. And his death and innocence, even I was like 7 or 8 when I saw this. I'm like, he's a child. What did he do to provoke this white backlash by adults who are supposed to protect, understand? And the fact that they were able to have no justice in that because of racism at the time. And that's why I think about Emmett Till and why I then started to read, and I'm reading other 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds from Muhammad Ali and Moody and others. They're like, he was my age. And seeing that as a youth and now as a professor, when I teach Till, I teach the fullness of Till. And I teach him and his life, the way his mother gave him the talk before he got on that train to board for Mississippi, because my students know the talk, especially my Black men in the classroom, and they're like, no, this is a longer history. But also to situate Mamie Till with other strong Black women of the period. And going back to Ida B. Wells Barnett, Mary Church Terrell, and this long history of Black women who fought for young boys to live, to thrive, and to survive. And so Mamie Till's bravery and boldness and continue to speak out. I think naming this bill the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill is a testament to her work and her legacy, and others who became bold and brave because of his death and to continue to fight out, but also at the same time, how lies and Carolyn Bryant Milan is still allowed to not have justice. And she knew that she lied in 1955. She has testified to that, and she has no remorse in what she did. We need to bring justice even for her and to tell the full story so her lies do not continue to stand and to continue to shape, because she has no remorse in what she has done. So this is where I see the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act as a response to her, as a refusal to understand and let her lies continue to shape the narrative, and let Till and Mamie Till Mobley define what is hate crimes and define justice for those past and present who never got justice.
Well, following up on those two really eloquent statements, I think that very question, Erica, is what set me on my quest. Who was Emmett Till? As a child of the civil rights movement, as Hillary described, when I first encountered an anniversary issue of Jet magazine that republished the story of his murder, juxtaposing the picture of his living face with the picture of his face and body in the coffin, I was stunned. And as an adolescent, I believe I was around the same age as Emmett was when I was encountering this picture. And I could not reconcile the image of torture and pain and cruelty of his death face with the glow and the ambition and the joy in his living face. And as someone who was going through desegregation myself, I totally identified with Emmett Till, the child. And I found myself even then not feeling just grief, but I missed him. And I said, how can you miss him when you don't even know him? And as I started doing this work as an adult playwright, then my entry point was always to discover who was Emmett Till, to satisfy that question that I had when I was an adolescent, that same age, and to also bring to light the agency and the role of youth in our struggle for liberation and in our resistance movement. Yes, Mamie Till Mobley's valiant and courageous act to have an open casket funeral was a gesture that fueled us all and turned her from into a warrior mother and an emblematic mother. But it was also Emmett's gestures in going south and challenging some of the mores that he considered ridiculous. Why can't you look somebody in the eye? Why can't you say goodbye when you walk out of the store? Why can't you whistle at a woman who walks in front of you? Challenging the very strictures against Black men and Black men expressing any individuation or authority or sexuality. And his was playful, but that playfulness and that assumption that he could be an equal person, challenging the bound, that was also a resistant spirit of his own. And I, as someone going through integration and seeing the Little Rock Nine and the sit-in movement in Greensboro, South Carolina, Ruby Bridges in North Carolina, even the young Brown, these were all children. And before Rosa Parks even refused to give up her seat, there was a young 16-year-old, I can't remember her name now, I wrote it down.
Claudette Colvin.
Who earlier in March, before Emmett's, that had refused to give up her seat. But she was what Saida Hartman might consider a sort of wayward girl, and was not exactly the image that the NAACP could put forward as a symbolic representative of a movement. But that spark of resistance came from that 16-year-old girl. And so when I think about, and when you look at Black Lives Matter, these are all young people. And so in my exploration of Emmett, I wanted to really explore the agency that youth have played in our struggle to achieve full respected equality and respected humanity. And then I discovered he was just a remarkably extraordinary, ordinary kid who was eccentric, and in my attempt to capture his life, I was hoping to show the value and the preciousness of every life of all of our children.
Yeah. I thank you. Thank you all for all of that. Two big things that I took just now was, or three, is how easily and how connected all of your experiences are, all of our experiences are. And Aoife, you mentioned the grief. How can you grieve for someone that you don't even know? You know, that you, I mean, I too learned about Emmett through the docuseries Eyes on the Prize. And I remember watching it with my mother, and she wept She was a child when she was like 2 when the incident happened, but it becomes a part of being Black in America. It becomes even just a person of color. It becomes a part of your story automatically. And we feel real feelings for every single loss that we have in this fight for equality. And the third thing that I took is children have been at the forefront every single time. And it's amazing and I know that many of our viewers may be watching with their young children, and we have a large uptick of the Gen Zs that are now, our audience, and they are loud and in the forefront, and they are the youth saying, how dare you still have us in this fight? And that's so powerful when you think about it. Not that there weren't adults, not that there are not adults, but it's such an interesting, when you think about it, Claudette and Emmett, and the list goes on and on.
Right.
And Ruby
Bull
and
Connor turned his hoses and dogs on children.
yeah,
Yep.
So, and John Lewis, was a young man,
yeah,
So that energy, that fullness of life, and that expectation of acceptance, the shock that you get as a young person, confronting this wall of refusal to accept our full humanity. Propels a reaction. You were mentioning Muhammad Ali. There is an anecdote. He has an anecdote about when he first learned of Emmett's death. He was also 14 years old. His kind of untrained resistance caused him to get some of his friends together. They went to the railroad yard and derailed a train, just as an act of immediate resistance and outrage that then kind of formed itself later into the magnificent activist that he became. So yes, one of the reasons I'm excited about the Till trilogy coming out now is that we are getting ready to enter into another really perilous time. And my hope is that youth will be informed and both activated by this mythic story. It is a mythic story in that way. And the reason we grieve for him is that we all have had within our experience and within our consciousness this pain and loss and terror in some form or fashion. It has touched everyone, every Black person.
Yeah. I want to segue now into talking about the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, the title of our program today. And I think that we need to tap into that. Lewis, the act was passed this past March, and that literally 67 years after Emmett Till was lynched. And I'm noticing one of our questions coming from the audience is lynching still prevalent in society? And I think that by you talking about the act and this new law, this new legislation might answer that question, because the reality is yes, lynching is still a thing.
Yeah, sadly, you are correct. Before I get into what the act does, I want to stress that its passage is significant, if for no other reason that this federal law has been more than a century in the making. Years before Emmett Till's murder in 1955, there were a whole host of failed efforts to enact federal anti-lynching legislation. As Dr. Green mentioned, Ida B. Wells back in 1892 first published Southern Horrors, the Lynch Law in all its phases, documenting the scourge of lynching in the United States. Since that time, more than 200 anti-lynching laws have been introduced in Congress. None have passed. Lynching just generally is a form of what can be described more broadly as hate crimes. And those are acts of physical harm or threats based on protected characteristics such as race or color. The first federal hate crimes laws were enacted in 1968, and that legislation was signed by President Johnson. And the law made it a crime to use force or threats of force against people based on their race, color, religion, or national origin because they are engaged in federally protected activities such as public education, employment, jury service, housing, public accommodations. Additional laws have been passed to protect against acts of hate. For example, in the 1990s, Congress passed laws to protect against arson and damage to religious property because of the race, color, national origin of the people associated with that property. But more recent efforts to pass anti-lynching legislation have been stifled. For example, the Justice for Victims of Lynching Act of 2018, introduced by then Senator Kamala Harris and her Senate colleagues Cory Booker and Tim Scott, passed the Senate but died in the House. The Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act defied the odds when it finally passed both chambers of Congress to become law on March 29th, 2022, which leads to sort of the question of what exactly does this act do now? The new law amends existing federal hate crimes law to add new provisions related to lynching. First, it designates lynching as a federal hate crime for the first time in U.S. history. The law defines lynching as a conspiracy to commit a hate crime that results in death or serious bodily injury. Second, the law punishes violations of the new anti-lynching provisions with greater penalties in certain circumstances. For example, it imposes a maximum sentence for convicted perpetrators of 30 years instead of lower sentences for other hate crimes or conspiracy charges. It also applies in a broader range of circumstances as it eliminates the requirement that the government prove intent to interfere with a federally protected right like voting or housing or jury service. All in all, the act will facilitate the prosecution of hate crimes and may also help to deter acts of violence that are motivated by hate. But going back to the timing of the passage of the law at this particular moment in time in 2022 and why that is so significant, the Federal Bureau of Investigation issues hate crime statistics every year. The statistics released last fall confirmed what many in law enforcement and communities around the country have suspected for years, that hate crimes are on the rise. They have increased to their highest level in almost 2 decades. The majority, over 60%, were motivated by race and ethnicity. And of those, more than half targeted African Americans. Since 2020, we also saw a steep rise in reported attacks on people of Asian descent due to the COVID-19 pandemic. DOJ's workload reflects responses to this rising tide of hate, which gets to, I think, is this still happening? In the last couple of years, DOJ has charged more than 50 people with federal hate crimes violations and obtained convictions for more than 45 defendants. And let me give you a sense of some of the facts in those cases. DOJ charged a man with hate crime and arson violations for burning a cross in his front yard to threaten and intimidate a Black family in Gulfport, Mississippi. And again, this is just in the last couple of years. DOJ got a guilty plea from a man who traveled to a Family Dollar store in Citrus Springs, Florida, where he followed a Black man into the parking lot, then directed racial slurs at him and physically attacked him, causing multiple injuries to his face and legs. DOJ obtained a 6-year prison sentence for a man who stabbed a Black man 10 to 20 times in the head and chest while screaming racial slurs at him. And DOJ secured a 25-year prison sentence for a woman in Iowa who intentionally used her car to injure a 12-year-old boy who she believed was African or Middle Eastern, and then 30 minutes later drove her car and injured a second Hispanic-looking 14-year-old girl who she believed was taking over American jobs and homes and shouldn't be in our country. This clearly demonstrates that this type of law and these types of harms are sadly still needed.
What I think is so interesting about what you just shared with us, Louis, is that what I think the national audience thinks about in terms of lynching is being strung up by and I don't think that the conversation is as broad as we would hope it is, that a lynching is a hate crime, full stop.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter how it is executed, it still counts. And I think that it is fantastic that this law now exists in a more firm position to try to safeguard against lives that are young lives. You just mentioned two that were children,
Yeah.
and that is you, Hillary.
Yeah, and I just keep on I keep on thinking about also the rise in hate crimes, but also the use of the symbol of the noose.
Mhm.
And the noose itself to intimidate. Nooses appearing at works of employment, including Amazon and other things. So even those symbols of a lynch in the classical sense expanded out so great. But one of the most direct things where I'm so glad this law came to pass in is after January 6th, because they were constructing gallows to
Yeah.
actually do a mass lynching. The fact that they were able to do that in a different type of conspiracy, it goes back to the public nature of this. And sometimes the spectacle and public mob mentality. And there's something that we have seen in those last couple of years of that mob mentality, but a willingness to not see people as people, but as someone whose life is disposable and one in which they have no guilt in removing or eliminating life. And that, I think, too, having this bill offers a lot more protections. And even if it stops a person, I'm just hoping it stops a rational person at a time. We're dealing with the irrational.
Yeah.
And but also too, giving communities another sense and making it a federal crime and having those maximums in there. Because I have a feeling, based on the cases that you mentioned and what I'm looking at, SPLC and EGI and their numbers, we need that federal protection because the states aren't going to do it. Mississippi refused to indict Carolyn Bryant after they realized she lied. This is not the first time they've failed to indict. States aren't going to do this. We need federal protections. And that's why having this as a federal anti lynching act is so crucial, because that's where we still have the few rights on that level in protection.
Mhm. Hillary, can you talk a little
Mhm.
bit about the historical context
Mhm.
and where Emmett's life and death sits in the larger arc of the civil rights
Mhm.
conversation?
Yeah, I see this two arcs, but two different archives. Life magazine and White America, an
Mhm.
introduction to Emmett Till's story, but also to Jet magazine and Jet magazine and its global reach, because Emmett Till was a global event. And it's Jet Magazine's coverage of that event that goes to France, it goes to England, it goes all the way around the world, including then Soviet Union in this Cold War activism. So when we think about the Civil Rights Movement, we also think about the role of the Cold War in convincing the federal government to make change. But in Jet Magazine version, that was one of their highest selling issues. I think my grandparents still had their copy of it. It was like one of those things you still had in households.
Mhm.
That was your education because of the segregated schools, those alternate learning, that future pedagogy in there. So that became the entry level for a lot of youth activists who become a part of the SNCC, the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Commission, and other civil rights lead. Ann Moody's biography, Coming of Age in Mississippi, really talks about her activation there, and then when she goes to college. But white Americans learned about this through Life magazine, and Life magazine, when Bryant confesses that he does it.
I think it was Look magazine.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
so seeing that, it becomes for some of the white progressives, especially college age students of UNC, Duke, other campus who become your freedom riders, and they start to realize that there's two Americas,
Mhm.
and that this African American youth and what happened to him, and then also too that there was something going on that wasn't a Southern thing. This was a national thing, and I think it was a way to then get scholars in there. And one of the things I like most about Emmett Till is what happens when these civil rights activists age out. John Lewis, young man. Claiborne Carson, young man. They either became academics and PhDs who wrote those first histories of the civil rights movement. Thinking about V.P. Franklin and his work on civil rights movement, SNCC, the book about SNCC, but also women in the movement with Fannie Lou Hamer and other women. Those activists knew that it wasn't just once they left, they had other skills, and that was to teach the next generation, because if they didn't write that history, it would not be told. And I think that's why we have a civil rights movement history that we can point to. The intentional collection and telling and centering of Till's story that's in almost every high school textbook, including the APUS. You do learn about Till. You might not learn about a lot of other people, but you will learn about Emmett Till. College classes is centered on him, playwrights and other things. You can do whole courses now on him. And that was because I think not only to tell the story, but to tell the truthful story based on how this was responded to in the media at the time, that they realized in order to do this, they had to tell it and tell it truthfully and to include everything. So I think what it was is also another response that we know more about civil rights movement, Emmett Till's place in history as one of those early catalysts for the modern day civil rights movement. And then we used to go Till to Rosa Parks and we move forward. But Till is usually centered first and foremost, and it's his murder and then his funeral is how most civil rights history is taught today in a lot of K through 12 and then college. So Till is getting his due on all levels, not just the academic, but in the classroom. And I think, and then also in museums, including the new Smithsonian Museum in DC, and centering him. He will never be forgotten. And I think that the drive to remember in his age and his loss of innocence is one of the ways why he is centered a lot, because what would have happened with an adult Till? Mm. And then the four little girls of Birmingham. Mm-hmm. How many other young individuals, foot soldiers who became martyrs for the cause, mm-hmm. and their age did not prevent their death?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There's something also in relation to the Till saga in particular that I, for want of a better phrase, call the found poetry of history. There was a nobility to that family. When I think of the passing of Queen Elizabeth, and the world's grieving, and it's not to take anything from that moment, but as members of a democratic republic, I wondered what would nobility look like for us, and there's no greater example of that than this family that rose out of its grief and put it on display to represent and defend the rest of Black America, and to bring the story of the true oppression that was going on to the world. Mm-hmm. And then within the saga itself, I often thought, if I were writing a fictional piece and I wanted to create a character who represented the righteous patriarch of an extended family, I couldn't make up a more appropriate name than Moses Wright. Mm-hmm. And Emmett Till, to go before, we call him the spark of the civil rights movement. It's within his name to prepare the soil, to make the way for others. The Trinity, the three T's in the middle of his name, representative of crosses, of Calgary, of the Black liberation theology that would become the bedrock of the modern civil rights movement. It was so money, the town, which is at the heart of it all. And the fact that his body rose up after 3 days, he was intended to disappear. But, that it is an actual fact that the body rose up after 3 days. But as a poet, I take that symbolism to to mark and to honor the palpable spirit, which was perhaps something else that I felt when I looked at his photograph and saw just the life force and the spirit force within this young man or this adolescent, and that was emblematic of his entire family. The fact that his great uncle, as a dark-skinned Black man growing up in Mississippi, would then have to testify in an all-white courtroom. It's not coming down from Chicago like Emmett's mother, but is an elder living in that land. Has lived and figured out how to survive in that land, and then has to come to grips with this.
Oh no!
Oh no!
Oh no!
Miss Eva, we lost that last little bit.
There were so many mythic and dramatic moments that are just embedded in the story.
Yeah.
That is also why it grips us even today.
Yeah. And I keep on thinking too why people are still threatened by him, and the fact that his marker is target practice for white Mississippians, largely college students. And I'm not going to name the institution that sends its fraternities over there, but they do. He still is, his symbolism cannot be snuffed out.
Yeah.
His age, his youth, all of that. And I think too, the fact that sign keeps on getting replaced also is a testament, like, no, he is representative of a very particular type of America, and we will defend this right to have his story told.
If I could add that, because I mean, we've been talking about sort of the image and the photo, and this tying it back to the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, which was introduced by Illinois Representative Bobby Rush. And Rush says he was personally motivated to bring the bill because when he was 8 years old, his mother put a photograph of Emmett Till's brutalized body found in Jet magazine on the living room coffee table. The chilling image shaped his consciousness as a Black man in America and changed the course of his life. And so in introducing this bill, it was a very personally motivated act for him. And so when the House passed the bill in February 2020, initially it didn't pass because the Senate was considering the bill during the nationwide protest and civil unrest over George Floyd's murder. And Senator Rand Paul at that time had blocked the bill from passage, expressing concern that the bill needed to be more limited to address more serious crimes. And so, yeah, exactly. And so Representative Rush reintroduced the bill the next Congress, adding a serious bodily injury standard. But you see from the cases that we're talking about, hate crimes cover a broad range of issues. So this time the bill passed in the House and the Senate and then was signed by President Biden on March 29th.
Could you give us a little bit of just like we've all, I hope, have seen like Schoolhouse Rock, I'm Just a Bill, like that's some of us that's our upbringing, but could you explain a little bit about like what the process is to get a bill to the point of passing? Is that something that we can educate our audiences on right now?
Sure. I'll do my best to do a brief intro into that. So bills get introduced by members of Congress, and to have any chance of success, they need bipartisan support from co-sponsors on both sides of the aisle. The bill then gets sent to a committee of jurisdiction for review, which may lead to markups of the bill or hearings on the bills. Other members of Congress can propose amendments that will then need to be discussed. And agencies like the Department of Justice who are subject matter experts in particular areas related to a particular bill, can usually get asked to provide technical assistance, which can prompt tweaks in bills and then further debate and compromise. Bills fortunate enough to gain traction will need to go through the process I've described in both the House and the Senate, and then work out conflicts or inconsistencies between the two bills. If either chamber fails to act during the congressional session that they're in, the bill dies, and then it has to be introduced the following session. And that's sort of what happened with the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act. And then the process starts over again. For hot button or polarizing issues, including some criminal justice matters, this legislative process that I've described can be even more daunting. I explained the process in the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, but there is another significant piece of hate crimes legislation that passed earlier, and it's also instructive to look at sort of what this process is like. And that's the Matthew Shepard, James Byrd Jr. Act, signed by President Obama in 2009, and served as a belated response to the murders of Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr., which had occurred more than 10 years earlier in 1998. Shepard was a student in Laramie, Wyoming, who was tortured and murdered for being gay. And Byrd was a Black man who was tied to a truck by 3 white supremacists, dragged behind it, and decapitated in Jasper, Texas. While the perpetrators were convicted of crimes, there were no applicable hate crimes. At the time, Wyoming's law didn't recognize sexual orientation as a protected characteristic, and Texas had no hate crimes law at all. The Shepard-Byrd law is significant because it was the first statute to allow prosecution of federal hate crimes motivated by a victim's actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. The law also enhanced the legal toolkit available to federal prosecutors to bring these types of cases, and the ability of federal law enforcement to work more closely with state and local partners on these efforts, which is a critical key being able to be successful in these cases.
I'm really glad that you brought up that law and Matthew and Mr. Byrd to the conversation, because Ford's actually has a really good relationship with the Shepards. We did the Laramie Project. And we recently just had them on a cabinet conversation during Pride Month to bring Matthew's story back into the forefront. And what is so important about what you just did by bringing him and that bill into this conversation is show that it's not just a color thing. It's not ever just a color thing. It's hate, and hate exceeds color and gender. And I think that's so important. And it's wonderful to know that we have these bills in place and these laws in place. Now, how they practice and are enforced, we got to work on, but we have them in place. And that's so, it's comforting to know. I'm not going to say that it provides justice in the way that I think that we all need it, but it's comforting to know that we have grounds to stand on.
I would just add that, we had the Department of Justice hosted a virtual conference called Confronting Hate: Strategies for Prevention, Accountability, and Justice last fall. I was the MC of that program, and we had more than 1,000 community leaders, advocates, law enforcement officials, and government colleagues attend. We heard from the Attorney General, the Assistant Attorney for Civil Rights, the FBI, U.S. attorneys from around the country, and perhaps most importantly, we heard from survivors of hate crimes and violence. And we also had the parents of Matthew Shepard, and we had the sister of James Byrd Jr. there. And it was a fantastic event. And these types of discussions, I think, do show the universality and how we're all interconnected. The problems are interconnected, and the solutions will also have to be interconnected.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to now talk about Aoife's shows.
Yes.
You mentioned in the first question what drew you to write these, but I just want to like full disclosure for the audience, y'all. The shows are called The Ballad of Emmett Till, That's Summer in Sumner, and Benevolence. And even in the way that you have entitled these trilogies, you could have wrote one show that covered all of these, but you have given us a trilogy and you have added more to the conversation. And being that this program is to talk about this crossroads of where history and storytelling come, I think having you here, Aoife, is you are the embodiment of that crossroads. And so why didn't you write this one? Like, what made you say, okay, this is a larger story and I have to tell it in 3 parts?
Well, you answered the question for me. I started it really as a one act, and it was essentially the first part of the ballad where Emmett, or Bobo as his mother called him, wants to go off on a trip to Mississippi, he gets no, and he finally wears her down and gets to go. And it ended at the train station where he says, I return to you a man. Don't forget to fix my bike, and then after I finished that part, I said, well, then let him go on. It was a lovely cryptic one act where you could then imagine the world that was the torture that was, or the tragedy that was going to befall him. But I said, you still need to tell this. You need to tell this. You need to find out, because I still didn't have a sense of who he was, which was my original quest. Mm-hmm. So then I took him on that 7-day journey, and also took myself on a research journey, doing a lot of primary research, talking to his cousins, talking to former classmates, talking to people who were his age, both in Chicago and Mississippi at the time, interviewing the numerous scholars who have worked on either civil rights narratives or the Till saga in particular. And then I wrote this big social drama that tried to do everything. And the trial got about 15 minutes, because, it was so full. And a colleague of mine, Ben Bradley, who has since passed on, had a 99-seat theater in Los Angeles. He said, I really want to do the play, but, it's got 15 actors. We got 99 seats, You condense it. So as a favor to Ben, I started to look at it to see how I could condense the cast. I said, well, if I just do Emmett's story, then I have a more distilled play and a more focused play, and I can do it with 6 actors. And that circulated for quite a few years at many regional theaters, very successfully. But I was still distressed that I had left some elements on the cutting floor, particularly the trial, and Mo's Wright and Mamie's trials as witnesses in that event, and the role of ordinary people who were courageous enough to come forward. The sharecroppers, Willie Reed and Amanda Bradley from an adjacent county. So I said, okay, let's do another play. Let's focus. And that allowed that part of this epic saga to breathe. And I also then, as both Lewis and Hillary were mentioning, the role of the press in bringing this story to the fore and bringing the story of Black resistance into mainstream America. I was then able to do the story of 4 reporters who were coming down from JET to cover the story and tell their role in this epic event as well. And so it became just a much richer experiment and experience of discovery when I could go behind the scenes and not just do the trial lawyers as their questions in the trial of the witnesses, but go behind the scenes to kind of extrapolate what their machinations and thinking must have been to then go into the courtroom. So it became a much more profound drama after that. And then I still had, as Hillary was mentioning, this nagging leftover issue of Carolyn Bryant. And she is like the last living participant or character, main character in this saga. And so I had one monologue that was from the original play. And then I decided to really do an interrogation, since she was never actually interrogated in the courtroom, and never really adequately interrogated by any of the kind of contemporary recasting of her tale. So I decided to, in my own way as a dramatist, blend the primary, use her own words to interrogate, and let the audience be the jury on how successful I was in that.
It's almost like you've given us our own little like imagined piece of justice, like these are the questions that we will never be able to ask her. This
Right.
is the answers that we will never get from her, and
Right.
giving them to us
Right.
as a piece almost.
Yeah. But then I didn't want to create, to create a white centrality again. So to balance her story, which is the first act of benevolence, I also wanted to tell the story of a young Black couple who got swept up in the tragedy of Emmett Till. And that is the story of Clinton and Beulah Milton. That is the act 2 of benevolence. So I essentially look at the impact in the Delta, looking at a white couple, that is Carolyn Bryant and her husband, and then looking at a Black couple, Clinton and Beulah Milton, and to kind of demonstrate that this pathology of racial hatred and terror distorts everyone, and makes the quest for love almost an impossible venture.
I'm so glad that you have added your take to the conversation, and y'all go see it. It's at Mosaic. I'm gonna plug it again before we're done today. Run until the 20th, so go get your ticket.
Man, I might have to fly up from North Carolina to see this one, because
I would love for you, Hillary. I would love for you to do it, because you touched on so many points that I try to elucidate. But it's truly this is a fascinating and a human drama, and if anything, the Till saga is about American civil rights, but it's also about this impasse we are as human beings, that we cannot seem to get beyond this need to create an other, and to have a quest for dominance over the other, using the emotions of hate and fear and the tactics of terror to do that.
And this is where I think your work is so powerful. Like, I, as a historian, then we have the legal side, the act, and this is how you create the empathy and understanding to help push beyond this impasse. And we need the arts. We need the arts, because as a historian, we need multiple storytelling and efficient telling. And I'm seeing a thing on the Q&A questions about why it's not been passed. As a nation, we haven't dealt with race or slavery and its aftermath. We are used to subjugation of other until we are able to see people and create a seat at the table so people can come and have those hard conversations. We'll never get past this impasse. And I think now, sadly, that takes the deaths of Charleston and Breonna Taylor and others, plus a massive pandemic, to build that empathy. So right now, I'm just ready for however people come to this and come to hearing about Emmett Till, whether it's a film, a documentary, that we can start having these conversations, how we can then move beyond where we are now.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that, Hillary, because that's the point of this conversation. Is we are all from different backgrounds. We are all representing different areas that keep the nation moving, being that, we have Lewis, who is representing the law and the government, you, Hillary, as a historian, Aoife, you as a playwright and artist. We need each other to get
Yes.
things done. There's no silo when you think about it. We have to lean on each other to make change. Um, I'm keeping you guys a little bit over, and I'm sorry, but this is so good. But I wanna ask two questions, because we have several questions that I'm seeing across the chats that all talk about the mothers, and we mentioned the mothers before, and we mentioned other women who have been fighting this civil injustice fight, uh, almost unnamed mostly, but who have the bravery of an Ida, who have the bravery of a Mamie. Um, Lewis, can you tell us what the significance is about naming it after Emmett now, instead of just calling it an anti-lynching act?
I think everything that we've been talking about is why. I mean, he is the to use Aoife's words, nobility in this area, and so I couldn't think of another name for this act except for Emmett Till, and I do think that we spend a little bit of time talking about Carolyn Bryant, and I think we're all a little unsatisfied with what the current state of affairs is. And we can envision, as the play does, what might happen in those circumstances. And I think it's a very personal issue. I think there is and will remain sort of this dissatisfaction with this particular case in this particular circumstances. And so what I do think is that we can look forward and hopefully avoid these things from happening again, bring justice to the ones that can happen. And I will say that there is also at the Department of Justice a cold case initiative. I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but it is an opportunity to look at other cases like this. And there is another law, for those of you who don't know, called the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crime Act that was passed in 2008 that authorizes the Department of Justice, the FBI, the Civil Rights Division, U.S. Attorney's Office, and we partnered with the NAACP, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the National Urban League, to identify these types of cases and solicit help to try to resolve more of these types of cases to the extent we can. The older the cases are, of course, the more difficult it is to bring justice, to interview people who have knowledge about those types of events. But we're still at the department committed to doing this work and resources. So if folks have information about any of those cases, is an opportunity for us to sort of keep the work of Emmett Till alive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hillary, can you talk about other women who have been involved in this history and trying to get us to what is now the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act?
Yeah, I even think about this as Mamie Till establishing a template for other mothers and wives. And I'm most specifically not just mother or children, I'm thinking about Coretta Scott King, as well as Malcolm X's widow, and what they were able to do. But also, too, when we get to oh gosh, I'm blanking out his name. Young man, a hoodie in Florida. Trayvon Martin, his mother, but also other mothers who've then come out to the fore and partner with Black Lives Matter, but also make sure that their children and their loved ones got the history there. And oftentimes, I forget what interview I saw, they mentioned Mamie Till. She established a template, sadly, because we know these mothers. I just think about how many other people died during the civil rights movement and since, whose names we don't know. And thinking about that community of mothers that were now more visible with social media, people actually bringing them to the conversation, that we're able to know more names, but who goes unnamed, but what solace they could do by reading these other histories of what Mamie Till and others women of the civil rights era did. And there's a really good book about the three mothers, including King's own mother, who gets assassinated. Like, it's just so many deaths, but centered around women, and women who wanted to make sure that story got told and got told to generations. And so for me, the mothers and keeping these stories alive and keeping it across the board is that unsung heroes and heroines of the story as well.
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
We had a performance of the ballad last week, where a group of DC-based group, Mothers Against Violence, attended and participated in the reflections panel conversation after. And all of them had lost their children to gun violence and or some form of physical violence, and be it at the hands of police or by private assailants. And when I learned that they were there, I was just so anxious about, how will they receive this work? And the two women who spoke in the panel were so gratified that this was a way for them to acknowledge, to see in the story of Emmett the kind of communal grief as protest, and it was buoying. And then when you talk about that human moment, each of them said that there was one line in the play where I think it's Emmett who said, just one moment. If they could have had just one moment, just one more day with their child. And it was such a profoundly moving collective embracing of them and the heightening of their stories. And they each carried with them a picture of their child, be it, a 7-year-old or 30. Some of these stories, some of these deaths happening 30 years ago, some happening 6 months ago. And it was just I'm tearing up now, but it was just such a profound moment for me to recognize, how important it is for us to get the stories right, to get the laws right, to get the history right, because these are really sacred lives. These are precious, sacred stories that have really, if bringing these plays to life at all impresses upon people how much this has been a toll in the history of our people, and how much it thus needs to be addressed.
Yeah. It is a tragedy that we still have mothers today who have to stand where Mamie stood, and it's wonderful that you have given them this piece. It's almost cathartic, it's almost that group exhale, like, I'm not alone.
Yes.
This is a club I never wanted to join, but at least I'm not alone, It's powerful. It's powerful. They gave us our 5 minutes, so I'm gonna wrap us because we've already surpassed our 5 minutes. I have one more question that I want to ask all three of you all. It is exciting, as heartbreaking as the context is. It is still extremely exciting that we are sitting here now in this conversation and actively making history. That is something that I don't think we all think about in the greater scheme of things. This isn't something that happened almost 70 years ago. This is something that started 70 years ago. But the reality is it started long before Emmett was even a thought, before Mamie was even a thought. And each of you are currently actively engaged in the work that keeps the conversation alive, that keeps the stories alive, that keeps those people, because at the end of the day, they were people first. They mattered. And I just want to know from each of you all, what are some ways that you think our audience, or that we as this collective, can continue to keep the story alive, to get involved, to get active, to, cause a ruckus, as we should be saying? What are some ways that you all think that could happen?
I say this all the time to my students. Everyone has their talent. Use your talents for good. And so for me, tweet out Black History Month facts, educate, because if we don't teach this, and this is why we're attacking schools and libraries, we need to keep these stories alive. One tweet a day is what you can do now. And then as you learn and develop your talents, you can add to it. But keep your eyes on the collective good, and that ordinary people did extraordinary things, and you will be a change maker if you remember that.
And I would say learn more about how to identify and report hate crimes. Everyone can do their part. The DOJ, the Department of Justice, has a hate crimes website. I think that Erica may put the link into the chat. But there's a ton of resources on there about hate crimes, including action items for everyone. You can work with your state and local law enforcement to understand the extent of hate crimes happening in your state or in your local area. You can identify community and faith-based groups to interact with law enforcement for victims, because those are the groups that victims of hate often go to first. Is their community and their churches and their mosques. And then invite law enforcement to discuss hate crimes and how to prevent them at local schools. The majority of hate crimes are committed by people under 30, and 17% of those under 18 years of age. So schools are, as Dr. Green said, where we should also be having these discussions. And then the other thing I would say as I turn it over to Aoife is go see plays like the Till Trilogy. You will be amazed. So
Thank you. Thank you for that, Lewis. I took a cue from Frederick Douglass, who was talking about the anti-slavery narratives and how important they were to changing the conversation and changing and pushing the nation forward. And he had a phrase that these stories were important. It was important for us to tell them so that we would change the national memory. And so whether it's sitting around the family table or talking with your friends, be conscious of not only our past, but our present. We have to tell our stories. Hip hop is only, they are the anti-slavery narratives of our time. They are telling our story as we see it, as they live it, with, some of the most brilliant reinvention of language and rhythm and the synthesis of the two, using our ancient music tracks, sampling from history, which is all historians do. So taking that energy, continue to use that energy. It is such a it's such a buoying new art form to watch, because it represents the strength and creativity and the brilliance of our invention of tools of resistance as we go, and tools of persistent, self-advocacy.
Yeah.
And find your public square, be it a theater, be it the youth section of the NAACP. Find your area of comfort to get involved, to make yourself heard, to make your presence felt. And though we are a flawed system, use every tool of the system, including voting, particularly as we are going into this cycle. And as a member of a medium that employs actors, get active, activate yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't want this to end, but we have to. This has been just an honor to host. And thank you, Aoife. Thank you, Lewis. Thank you, Hillary. My heart is full because this was truly, truly more amazing than I think I even could have planned for. Thank you. To our audience, we hope that you enjoyed this conversation today. We will continue to monitor and respond to comments on the socials that we weren't able to get to during the live. Thank you to all who did submit questions. If you are interested in Aoife's plays, the trilogy, the Till trilogy, it is now playing at Mosaic Theater. That's at Atlas on 8th Street, y'all. Go see it. And it's playing until November 20th. You can find more information about Mosaic and Aoife's shows at mosaictheater.org/Till Trilogy. Until next time, thank you all. Good night.
Nice to meet all of you.
Nice to meet all of you.